On this channel, I specialise in making really complex looking images easy to create. So just follow along with my step-by-step tutorial of this painting and you will amaze yourself. Okay, as always, I'm using the iPad Pro with the app Procreate, but I don't see any reason why you can't take my techniques and process and apply them to a different app on whatever tablet you happen to be using. But as such, within Procreate, I've opened one of their default canvas sizes, which is A4, 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. In terms of the color profile, I'm using the sRGB with the 2.1 at the end. It's here on the list of default color profiles. In terms of the brushes today, I'm going to be using within airbrushing the soft brush at the top of the list, possibly the medium brush also within airbrushing. I may also use the organic rainforest brush. Within the luminance brushes, I'm going to use the light pen. In terms of the colours, in this area I pre-selected a colour palette. Each of these colours has linked to it a hexadecimal code, and each of these codes is noted down in the video description. All you need to do is copy them, type them into this space one at a time, press enter. The colour will appear in this little circle. You tap it into here and you can piece together the colour palette that I'm using. Well, next to those codes, to save you some time, is a link that takes you to my Patreon page and you can download that colour file in its entirety for free. And obviously Patreon is the place where you can go and gain access to exclusive content and support this channel. And with all that said and done, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do with my colours is go to the top row, the first colour. I'm going to drag into the canvas and flood fill the entire canvas. I'm going to stay on the same layer, so I'm still on layer 1. I'm going to use the airbrushing soft brush and I'm going to use the second colour on the top row of our selected colours. I'm going to put the size of this soft airbrush to, well, about 20% and 100% opacity. And with this brush, I'm going to select the halfway point on our canvas and draw a line straight across. I'm also going to take this corner and do a line up to the top right corner of the canvas and just fill in the remaining gap. I'm going to go to the adjustments here at the top, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur it to about the 50%. I'm going to now create a new layer, layer 2, and I'm still going to use the soft brush, but I'm going to go to the third colour. I'm going to turn the size of the brush down and about 15% opacity. And just above the halfway point, I'm going to do some stretched out bands of this colour. Now I'm pressing quite lightly too, because there's a difference between pressing on hard and pressing on lightly, even within the same opacity. So depends how you use it. I'm pressing quite lightly and going over it a few times just to build up these kind of more gentle, subtle shapes. Just from the halfway point and a little bit above. And then as we get higher up, we can just start to go over it a few more times, tap it in so it's a bit more loose, not quite as thin and as long a stripe, it can be more broken up. I don't really care about this side because I'm going to add some really dark colours there. It's really just subtle effect for over at this point. I'm then going to switch colour to the fourth colour and still using the soft airbrush. I'm going to put it up to a bigger size, 5%. Keep it the 15% opacity, and I'm just going to, on the same layer, start to build in large sort of band stripes of this lighter colour, starting from the left, just blending it in. Again, not pressing too hard, I'm just allowing it to sort of stripe across, and I'm releasing pressure so it doesn't really impact too much on this side. I'm just having it creep in from the left, and then it kind of meets the other ones and merges and blends with it. And I can allow this to come a little bit further up too, like so. I'll create a new layer just in case it goes wrong. I tend to keep things slightly separated on different layers. It means that you can change the properties of them later on, or just correct things as we go if required. So I'm going to skip a colour. I'm going to go to the sixth colour on the top row. I'm going to put the size at 2% and I have the opacity at 10%. And just over on this side, I'm going to, with a slightly different approach, more granular kind of texture, I'm putting in points and I'm allowing them to condense together. And I'm also having a small version of this kind of round looping shape. allowing them to amass into these more billowy, round forms. And I'm also going to put it up to about 5% and just allow some softer versions to creep in here too. Bring in some more stretched out shapes from this side. I think it's going to be more blended in. I'm going to put it back down to about 2% and just again bring in some more tapping, broken shapes. Perhaps just a few that are stretched out too. So we have combinations that can work quite nicely. Again, just pressing lightly. It's quite subtle. This is just really kind of texture. Some of it's going to be covered up by more imposing dark colours anyway. Before I carry on, I'd just like to request that if you like this kind of video, please give the video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe, and don't forget the bell notification to make sure you're notified of all my future videos too. Okay, so we're going to go for the backwards to the 5th colour, not top pro, and not changing the settings, so we're still at 2% size and 10% opacity. I'm just going to add to the mix this warmer, more pink colour. It's important it's at low opacity. If you shove it up there, it's just going to look really, really overpowering. Even a little bit more than 10% is going to look too much. So the 10% is just about right, and it's subtly bringing it in. It's having a strong influence, even at that very low percentage. I do prefer to have low percentage colours and press lightly and build things in really gradually, especially with something like a sky. And we'll bring some more bands up here perhaps. More stretched out shapes like we were doing originally. I'm really just almost just hovering the pencil pressure across the screen, so I'm not pressing on barely at all. Allow this to go over this side, although we're going to obscure it. Doesn't really matter. And just a few more points of this texture. Okay, so I'm going to create a new layer, layer 4. Go back to our colours. We've used the first 6, and it's time to really start putting in those dark imposing colours now. So we'll start with the blue. The pink colour that's next to it and the other pinks are going to be more the highlighted colours, which are either coming from the sun or they're going to be coming from the lightning that we add to the scene. So we'll start with the blue anyway. And we're going to change brushes. We're going to go to the organic rainforest brush. Now I have amended it, so I'm going to slightly amend it backwards. So first of all, I'm going to reset it, then tap on it again. And the spacing is the thing I want to change. So currently, well, by default, it's at 27%. I want to put it up to 40%. I don't really want to change anything else. I'm going to put it to sensible size, maybe about 8%. I don't want it anywhere near 100% opacity, so I'm going to put it down to about 25. And I'm going to start on this side, and it instantly starts to create this really textured and light effect. And if you struggle with creating this kind of texture, then it starts to do the process for you. You know, if you were to use the soft brush and put each of these little parts of the texture in by hand, it's going to take you a long time just to have accomplished what I just did in a moment there. So it can really be a good way of creating more random texture with ease, and it, you know, just takes some of the pressure off you. So I'm going to have it kind of a little bit patchy up there. I can always go in with the eraser too, allowing it to build up. And we're probably going to have it pretty smoothed in anywhere else, so I'm not going to add too much of it anywhere else. It was just for this section really, and I am going to soften it in even more. So I'll go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur. I don't even want it to be as specific as it is, so I'm going to put it to about 8% blur, and it's really softened it in. I will create another layer, layer 5, and this time I'm going in with the soft brush with an airbrushing again. 6% size, 10% opacity, with the same dark blue, and I'm just going to start kind of merging some of the texture in so it softens in. So this is going over the top of some of that texture just to reduce it a little bit, especially as it comes over to this side. Just around the edges where that is, just soften it in. Then I'm going to put the size of the brush up to 10% and just have it extending across the very top area. And again, I'd rather build it up gradually by pressing on lightly and letting it just build up and up and up with lots of individual strokes. And I'm going to do it from this point down below the halfway and just keep going over it, building it up like that. Maybe just soften that in a little bit more. And you can see we've got this really nice softer transition and just a bit more detail in the texture there. I'm going to reduce the size of that brush to 4%, and then maybe from this shape just start to build in some more of this texture going across, and you can hear more of that tapping, individual points of texture. So it's not long stretched shapes, it's really just more granular, a bit like we've got up there, but this time by hand. And I'll reduce it down to the lower part of 3%. Again, just push some of this texture up and down, make it more interesting, and then really release the pressure when we're getting over to this side. I don't want too much of that over here at all. Maybe I'll do something similar up here, just extend it across, maybe up in this top section. So that's too much. We've got some of these bands that are here that we did in the other colours. So maybe I just want to start very lightly going over with this colour too. So it all kind of merges together a little bit. Again, lots of brush strokes to really merge them nicely together rather than being too heavy-handed. Okay, I think the sky is starting to look quite nice, but we're not finished. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 6. I'm going to go to this pink colour. If you go to the colour disc, then you can see it is very much red pink, but it is quite a dark version of that. So still with the soft brush, let's put it a bit higher, 6% size, and it probably needs to be a bit stronger so that we can really see it. So let's try 20% opacity, and we're going to go over the top of the blue, again pressing lightly, and I'm using a circular motion now just to bring this in. And it is still quite dark, so you can see it really impacts where it is currently light. It really is impacting on there. So I am just easing up on the pressure a little bit. I want it to be still soft and have it just sort of blur in a little bit. We can always add more of this later. Once we've added the lightning to the scene, maybe it makes more sense to revisit this and go back in and add more of it. But I just want some of it in there initially. And I'm pressing lightly, extending it over to this section here. Large sort of sweeping bands of that tone. I'm taking this sort of light colour and extending it all the way across. So this purple appears a little bit lighter than the dark blue. I'm going to add it to this bit of cloud here, just go over it a little bit. And then we're going to have the lightning in this kind of region. So you're going to have just a bit more of a glow. We'll use the lighter colours in addition to this too later on, but initially just a bit warmer, I think will work. Okay, we're going to add some land features in, and then we'll go in and we'll have a lot of fun with the tightening up of detail and the lightning later on. So I'm going to create a new layer, which is layer 7. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do on layer 7 is use the selection tool and the rectangle, and I'm going to use this to select the shape in the bottom area where our horizon line is going to be. Now, if you find it quite difficult to draw that line, then this is something you can do to really assist with that process. So I'm going to go to, well, I might as well use this black colour. I'm going to drag that into that empty box area now, and it's just created a shape. Now, it is very harsh, so we don't want it to look like that. So I'm immediately going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur it in to about the 8%. And you can use the transform. I've got it on freeform, so I can select that little blue circle, and I can put the horizon line now. I can move it by stretching the box. I can effectively put that horizon line exactly where I want it to be. I'll stay on the same layer. I'm going to use the soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to go to the first colour on the middle row. And now we've got that horizon line to work off. It should be fairly easy. I'm going to go in with the 2% size, 20% opacity that we're using before is not very strong, so I need to put that up to about the 60. And that's going to look quite dramatic compared to the black. And I'm just going to go along on that horizon and just really quite in a rough fashion. I want to create some shapes that cut above that horizon line, and then other times it just dips below. So I just want it to look more irregular. Now there's things that might be in the distance there that, you know, aren't specified, but it just creates a little bit more of a random look for that horizon line. It's just looking a bit too solid. So there you go. And perhaps we can do that again. Maybe turn it up to 3% size and then tap in some more points. Really tap it in, points of texture, and we can sweep across again. And again, just add to the texture on this kind of distant horizon. Again, do the same. It has to be points. If you do too sweeping a line, then it's too thick. We just want to break up in this area into some shapes initially. We want to create kind of scrubland effect. Really quite arid, quite dry, but we have got lumps and bumps and grass mounds in the mix. So I'm pressing on quite lightly still. Maybe put that up to 4% size. And I've got a little bit of a circular kind of mound shape movement that I'm creating here. I'm in anticipation of some of these shapes that I know that are going to be there. I don't want to go overboard with that. I don't want to press on too much and make them really prominent. Again, a light touch I think is useful. If you feel like you're quite heavy-handed naturally and you struggle to really add light touches in, then you can take my percentages of 60% and dial it back to, I don't know, 40%. And that way you can press on a bit more and it's not going to be quite as powerful. So I'll stick with the 40%, although I quite like to just keep it at some of the higher percentages sometimes and press lightly. I'll continue the rest with a higher percentage. And we could also put the size up to 6%. And yeah, almost like center perspective and almost a real landscape appearance already. And it's very broad stroked and vague, and we're going to go in now and add a lot more detail. So on that basis, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 8. I'm going to go to the second color on the middle row, still with a soft brush, 2% size, 40% strength. We'll go and do this quite nicely. In fact, I'm going to put this down to the lowest part of 2%, because even within 1 percentage point, there's quite a lot of wiggle room. So I'll put it down to the lowest. So just nudge it up into the 2%. Maybe just zoom in a little bit. So anyway, we're doing the same with this lighter color now, all the way across that distance. Just some points of texture in there across that kind of distant horizon line. I mean, there's definitely an argument to be said that, in the very far distance, you're going to get all of these little points of textures merging together. And then still with the same brush settings, just come down a notch, come down a spacing and continue the texture really. And we could perhaps arguably use something like the organic rainforest brush again, and we could start to do this with this kind of brush. And yeah, there's an argument to be made for that. So let's try that. 2% size, what do we have here? 40% opacity, and you could start to use this to speed up the process a little bit. Maybe even put it higher, 50% opacity on this brush. Now, I'm quite a control freak, so I really like to get in there and manually do these things where I can, but you can see it does speed up the process a little bit. Put the size up to 4%, bring it in a little bit lower, 5%, and then underneath that, you can do another sweep of that, 8%, and do another sweep of that. And I don't think I'm going to do much more of this, but I could put it up to 12%, and just for this bottom area, do that a little bit, 20%, really at the bottom. Okay, so that's quickly created that center perspective, but I do feel that it's only the start point, so we'll get in there really and be more specific now with that airbrush. But it has helped us speed up the process of creating that textured perspective. I think it really works. So I'll probably stay on the same layer. I think I'll take that, what we've done so far though, and go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur it in just a touch. So 4%, just soften some of the edges of that rainforest brush. I think that works better. We've still got all of the effect, it's just not quite as crisp around the edges. So with the soft brush, still to go back to it, airbrushing soft brush. We've used the first 3 colors. Perhaps we'll go for the fourth, which is more vibrant, 2% size, 40% opacity, and perhaps in that far distance, I can just afford now to bring in some bands, some stripes, where we're really getting a sense that in the distance, when you get lots of individual points of texture, they tend to clump together and they become more thin and stretched out, just like they might do with areas of cloud. When it's closer to, you see the individual shapes, but then the more distant ones becomes just like a stripe. So this is a slightly lighter color, so we'll notice it, and we can just cut that across the very distant areas, and we can just add kind of more bands of this texture. I think that will work. That will further enhance the sense of distance, where you don't notice the individual points of texture quite as much in that far distance. I'm going to go for the next color, which is significantly lighter. So the 5th color, 2% size, 20% opacity. This is going to be something we want to just be a bit mindful of. We've got lots of texture in there already now, but we can use it to our advantage. We can start adding to it. We can either pick out the points of texture that are already there and just imagine like the top edge of it is being more lit, and just aim for it there. Or if we're going over areas with texture already, then you don't need to respect it quite as much. You can just go in there and, you know, randomly create these textural details, disregarding what's there and just going over the top a little bit more freely. So I'm just moving, kind of scattering it around, trying to keep it as random as I can. We don't have to have it completely evenly distributed. There might be some bits that we seem to get a lot more of this highlight. And as I'm coming further down, I'm allowing some of these textures become slightly further apart. It's not to say you can't have clusters of it, they're already grouped together, but there might be other bits where you leave quite a nice dark gap and there's nothing in that region. And that's going to be more and more the case as it gets nearer to us down at the bottom of the canvas. Again, over at this area, let's really add some of this nice highlighted colour. So I'm going to allow this texture to be added in really quite nice and random. I'm allowing the brush marks to just kind of up and down, left and right, really scatter in there. Don't allow your brush marks to become too rigid and too contrived. I think that sometimes that really works against you. I'm also going to start allowing some real clear, almost like bands coming in here, top edges. So in addition to the real scattered, then there's no harm in having a clearer outline of things creeping in the mix too. And I think I'll create a new layer, layer 9. I'm going to go to the next color along, which is not green, but by contrast to other things, because it's heading more towards the yellow, by contrast it's going to push it more in the green direction. Not as much as some of these other colors, which again are not green, but because they're like grayed out oranges, they are going to appear green next to the colors we've already got. Anyway, we'll get to that. We're on third from the right on the middle row. We're on the soft brush at 2% size and 20% opacity. And again, we want to have variety of hue, different colors. And as it gets closer to us, we're going to introduce more of this kind of effect that looks green. You're going to notice the variation in colors as it gets closer to us. Perhaps I'll put the size up a little bit bigger, 3%. And it's still on the soft brush, so it's not too dramatic a texture, it's quite subtle. This is sort of like the middle distance that I'm applying this color now. I can just a smattering of that here and there. I'm going to go for the next color, which is significantly lighter, I would say. So we need to just be a little bit more mindful of it. Back down to the 2%, still 20% strength, opacity, and I can just add some of this as highlights in the mix. You don't want to go too full on with this, but you can add it. Perhaps the lowest part of 2% would be useful. Whoops, just into the 1% there, put it back. And we just want a slight sharpening up of some of these top edges. It is going to catch the light in some areas and just be a bit more dramatic. Again, we can put it back up and just fill in some of these areas with little points of texture, forgetting in some areas about the mounds and just randomly scattering in. Just fill in some of these areas a little bit more. Again, we don't want the entire area to be uniformly treated. You're going to have some areas where you don't really get much of the dark showing through at all, and other areas where you really want some of that dark color to be remaining. We've got this color on the end, which is a real red, dark red, and I think if we put that up to about 4% size, we can just start to imagine now that on the ground nearer to us, let's put it even more actually, 10% size, why not? Put it up to 30% strength, opacity, and just on some of this nearby ground area, we can imagine that the earth that's being revealed is no longer just solid black. We're going to see some of the colour emerging, and it's going to be this reddy brown colour, which is really quite nice. Okay, I'll come back to some more of that texture. Let's really get to the heart of this image, which is going to be the lightning. So we're going to create a new layer, layer 10. I'm going to change the properties, the blend mode rather, from normal, scroll down by tapping on the N and then scrolling, put it to the add, and you'll notice the little N that we tapped on has now changed to an A. We're going to stay with the soft brush initially, but we're going to change colours. We're going to go for, well, let's go for this pink colour to begin with. We're on the add blend mode, so that's going to change the impact of this colour. I'm going to put it to 4% size and low at around 10% strength opacity. I'm going to pick a point where I want the lightning breaking through this cloud. I'm just tapping in until I happen upon the area where I think it will work best. And allowing it to build up, and really centering in on the breakthrough point. So I really tap a few times on that area and then just allow that to sort of merge in a little bit too. Let's just put that up to 10%, tap a few times, 20%, just tapping in around that area. Okay, so that's created some of the glow. Perhaps we need to change the lighter pink right next to it, turn them back down, 4% size, and just start to ramp that up a little bit more. Really concentrate in the center of that. We're really building in this glow and ramping it up. Again, I'm being a little bit kind of tapping it in and a little bit more random with it, and that's fine. We don't want it to be just a very neat shape. And I'm now going to move to the white on the bottom row, and just in the very center there, I want to build in obviously a real intense point, so I'm just tapping it in a few times. Maybe I need to reduce that down even more, 2%. Let's really get to the point where the lightning is breaking out in a point there. I can allow it to just come down a little bit further, just the start of our lightning streak. Okay, so that set the stage for where the lightning is coming from. We're going to change, we'll create a new layer, why not? Again, change the blend mode to add, change the brush to the luminance light pen, and we're going to put the size. I'm going to try 3% size, 100% opacity, and we're zooming just a little bit. And with this lightning feature, it's important not to get sort of straight lines for any duration. The lightning is going to be very much like a tree branch. It's going to twist and turn and have little corners and bumps. It has to be very kind of shaky. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to hover my Apple Pencil on the screen and I'm pressing on quite hard. And I want it to jitter. I want it to really not be consistent. I'm deliberately pushing it to jitter and it's going to strike the floor there. And I'm going to have another one. Again, just allow it to wobble and jitter and then release the pressure and have it dwindle off into nothing. And you might need to practice with this, try and get the shapes to where you think they look most naturalistic. But basically we're just going to continue on this theme. So I'm going to have another point here where we have a bottle lightning coming out. I'm trying to press on, but also keep it kind of wobbly and then release the pressure as it goes further away. We can always zoom in and go back over them. Try not to do that too much. I think it has a more naturalistic look if you can do it in one fluid kind of movement. But here we go, we have zoomed in. So perhaps from some of these, we're going to have branch points where it just splits off. And again, just introduce a bit of a wobble if you just shake it quite deliberately and then release the pressure and it gets lighter and lighter. And then you might need to zoom in a little bit more, take one of these branch points and just, again, lightly sort of jitter it away. And you just keep repeating this process really. And we can allow some of these branch points to overlap too. If we want it to look more natural, I think that's important that we do that. We need to try and match the size, so therefore the pressure with the branch point from where it's come off from. So for example, if you start here and you press too strong there, then that weight of lightning is too strong to have grown out from that point. So it needs to be equal to or less than the area where it grows from. And if you feel like the area it grows from just needs to be strengthened up to allow the new additions you've just added, then you can do that. And then down here, we can just add some little streaks that grow off. And you can just keep adding these to your heart's content, really. You can really spend a long time fine-tuning this. I definitely want some that are striking through to the ground more. I'm zooming in and out just to try and get the effect, get a sense of what's working and what isn't. Again, I'm doing this quite zoomed out, so if you want to zoom in and just fine tune that, then that's probably a good idea. Perhaps just going to pick a couple of my main lines and just really go in there and not press too much, but certainly press more and bring out some of the main streaks of lightning that I really want to emphasize, like so. I do think the real faint ones that are in the mix are super important to just create that variety of intensity too. Now, in addition to that effect with the light pen, which gets you pretty far along the process, you can go to the adjustments, the bloom setting, and you can choose to slide that across. Now, that really can be quite exaggerated. So we've got from nothing to 100%, and somewhere along the way, I think, is about the right level. Now, the effect kicks in pretty sharply, quite in the low percentages. So I definitely don't want it at the 100%. So in my example, somewhere about the 20% is pretty good, maybe even less. So maybe about the 15% I think works quite strongly. I'll stay on that same layer, go back to the airbrushing soft brush. Perhaps I need to change back to a different color. So I'll go for the white, in fact, why not? 2% size, 10% opacity. And I just want to further extend, perhaps just to include little breakthrough points that we've added in the mix. It needs to allow for that. I think that could work better. I'm also going to turn the size of the brush up to 10% and just go over it a couple of times just to really illuminate that top area. I think that will work better. Turn it back down 3% and maybe just the clouds in the vicinity are just being highlighted and affected by that too, so we can just affect them a little bit more. And we're starting to really build in that impact now, and I think that's working. So I'm going to create a new layer, layer 12, change the blend mode from normal to add. I am going to go back to the pink colors at the top, so I'm going to go for the darker pink, which is fourth in from the right. Soft brush, 5% size, 10% opacity, and again I'm going to just further push the impact of this outwards from that region. It's not possible to go over the white that's in that and destroy it. That's the reason we use the add blend mode, is it is non-destructive to light colors. It just adds to them literally, and we can extend the impact of some of this light across some of this cloud area too. Push it around a little bit more, maybe having it tapped in for this upper region, maybe even higher on the percentage, 8%. Have it impacting a little bit more up in this upper region too. I want to preserve some of the dark colors, but it's nice to have a nice contrast. So I'm going to turn it back down 2%, and maybe we could just bring in some more articulated texture in the cloud there too. Doesn't need to be too much. I think keeping it quite vague works nicely. Perhaps I'll just change to a lighter color, maybe the second color on the top row, and just have some cooler shapes appear. 2% is a bit small, 4% might work, just a variety of different hues that, you know, it's still catching the light and creating texture, but not all uniformly the same. Not too much in the corner though. Now there probably should be some impact on that bottom row. I don't want to go over the top with it, so I'm going for the lightest colour pink with the soft brush down to, well, it has to be 1%, 10% strength, opacity, and just where the lightning kind of hits the ground, I just want to create a sense that maybe it's illuminating the area, and I don't want to go over top with this. I'm just creating a touch more of highlighted things in the region. Honestly, I think it would be so easy to overstate this. Perhaps I'll even turn it down to the lower part of 1%, zoom in a touch more, and just concentrate around exactly where they meet the land, and that's it, just a hint. Otherwise it just looks a bit too detached at that meeting point. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 13, and I'm going to go back in with this black colour, so the third colour on the middle row. I'm going to go in with this soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to put it up to 5% size and 50% strength, opacity, and we created this ground of kind of like a reddy colour, but now it's time to go in and just create some more foreground shapes, some mounds that really interrupt that. We don't need to do too many of them, but this more foreground definitely needs to be interrupted. maybe turn it back down 3%, and then slightly above that we can just create another layer of these, just some kind of round lumps and shapes here, something like that. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 14. I'm going to go back in with some of these lighter colours, so I'm going to go in with the third colour from the right on the top middle row with the airbrushing soft brush, 3% size, 30% strength, and I'm just going to build in some hints of texture that corresponds with some of these darker mound shapes. Perhaps I'll turn it up to 6% size and even further down at 15% opacity, and just really have them softer, building in there more gradually. Now I'm all for creating the effect, and this is just that. It's not necessarily every single blade of grass detail. Now I am going to be offering a more refined version of this over at my Patreon, like an extended tutorial. So if you're enjoying this and you want to continue into the finer detail, then there is a link down in this video, the description area, that takes you to the exclusives area of my Patreon page that shows you the extended versions of all of these tutorials. And I'll include the specific link to the extended version of this tutorial pinned to the comments. It'll be at the top of the comment section, not immediately upon posting this, but usually by the next day after I've uploaded it. So if you are watching this anything other than on the first day of me uploading it, then the link should be pinned down in the comments already for you. Anyway, so yeah, I've just created like a soft focus, almost out of focus impression of the nearby greenery, which I think works really effectively anyway. So our point of focus is kind of here and then onwards. Perhaps we'll go down to some of these greens. We've got a dark green. We can add this to the mix subtly, just nudging it in here and there, not too much. And again, with the next green, it's not really a green, but it does create that impression. Perhaps I'll turn that back down a little bit to 4%, and we can just add a bit more of this in here. It is only at 15% opacity, so it's really subtle. Third one across. And then it's starting to merge with some of these more detailed areas that appear more sharply in focus. Stay on the same layer. I'm going to go up to the second colour from the right on the middle row, turn this down to 2% size, and probably needs to be stronger on the opacity, so 30% strength, the lowest part 2% that should be. And again, I'm going to bring in some more of these highlights. I just want to amplify some of the light effect in some of these areas. And maybe this really nice orange, so fourth in from the right as well. Perhaps the lowest part, 2%, is a bit sharp, so higher up on the 2% I think might work better, in fact. Continue to add some of these contrasting light points. And I'm also going to add a little bit more of it in the very distance, so maybe back down to the lowest part, 2% again. Just really ramp up some of these lighter colours in the far distance. I think that will work nicely. And then maybe a couple here, maybe not quite in the far distance. It's quite nice to have the dark contrast with the lightning, but just peeled a little bit back from there. We could add some bands, maybe of this lighter colour in the mix too. Go to this colour, second from the right, and add that in the mix. Okay, I'm going to leave this tutorial on YouTube here at this point, but like I've already stated, there is a more extended version, or will be imminently, over at my Patreon page. If you have enjoyed this tutorial, please remember to give the video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe, and don't forget that all-important bell notification to make sure you're notified of all my future tutorials too. All the appropriate links I've mentioned are down in the video description, and I hope to catch you back here very soon. Bye for now.